Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Triple P, the PatPro podcast. I'm your host, affectionately known as a cartoon avatar on Twitter by some, PatPro. On today's pod, we have a special guest. He's one of the busiest guys out there. By my count, this is his seventh pod so far this week. He is the host of the Everything Pats podcast, the Locked On Pats podcast, the Greg Bedard Patriots podcast with Nick Cattles. He's also a part-time radio guy sometimes for 98.5 The Sports Hub. He's known as at Nick C Radio on the old X machine. It's Nick Cattles. Nick, thank you for joining the pod tonight. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, man. Glad to jump on here for a little bit and talk some Patriots.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you. You're the third guest technically I've had.
Nice.
In my 4 episodes, so that's pretty cool. Now, before we get into the meat and potatoes of this pod here, Nick, I do have to ask, how weird is it that 6 months ago you took some questionable information from an unknown source, and now you're on a podcast with the guy?
It is a little bit weird. I will say, I think this is the first podcast I've done where I'm not sure who this actually is that I'm doing it with. I just know you from Twitter. I know the avatar that you mentioned. I don't know your real name. I don't know what you look like. I don't really know where you live. So it's all a big mystery. But yeah, man, you threw out the Doug Marrone stuff to me. And I think maybe another thing or two before that, and I said, okay, well, I'll take a swing here, and if it's right, then he's going to get all the flowers, and it ended up being right. So good on you, and yeah, it is kind of a weird podcast to be a part of, but I'm happy to be here with you.
Well, we're going to break some podcast news here. My name's John, and I'm from Rhode Island. Big
Nice.
shocker. I let a bit of anonymity go, but that's okay. Now, before we get really into it, just going to set expectations for the pod here. For the listeners, we're going to go over the most recent OTAs the media was allowed to observe, and we're going to talk about the wide receiver depth situation that the Pats kind of have brewing. Before we get to that, though, going to go for the big ask. For the listeners, please like, comment, and subscribe on whatever platform you're on. To steal Nick's line, it's how you beat the algorithm.
That's right.
All right. Now, first, OTAs with Stephon Diggs making an appearance. I'm not really interested in talking about the boat situation. I think the show from 2 to 6, we all know who the ones I'm talking about, have really beat that to death. And Nick, I'm sure you've already talked about this on various pods. In fact, I know you have. But I just want to get your take here. How surprised are you that Diggs is looking the way he is so far?
Surprised. I mean, I thought he would get involved at some point here. Maybe show his face, mandatory minicamp, and be on the field. But be on the field for support. And I just remember last year the Kendrick Bourne situation. He didn't take part in OTAs. He didn't take part in most of camp, if not all of camp. And I said to myself, well, even if Diggs is ahead of schedule, then maybe we see him early in camp doing some of the things that we saw him doing this week at OTAs. So I guess we should have taken him at his word, and his agent, whoever leaked the story when he first signed with the Patriots, saying that he was ahead of schedule, because he certainly looks ahead of schedule, and he looks much better on video than I ever anticipated him looking in early June.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, in the few drills we got to see where him and Kayshon Boutte were kind of mirroring each other, he looked like, I mean, honestly, he looked faster in and out of his breaks and just straight line than Boutte did. I
Yeah.
mean, they were pretty close, but it was shocking. I mean, I know Scott Zolak had the reaction of the day where he's just like, look at him cut. And yeah, I guess we should have believed his agent. We should have believed the hype, and I guess we should trust Schefter when he tweets something. He's not just going to go on a limb like that unless he kind of has the inside track.
Yeah, I mean, when guys are coming back from this, you're looking at change of direction. You're looking at, those quick, decisive cuts. And I agree with you. You're looking at that video. I thought you could argue that Diggs actually ran that drill better than Boutte did. And we're talking about a guy who just tore his ACL. What was it, 8-9 months ago? It was like October, right?
Last week of October, I think it was.
Yeah, so we're talking about somebody who tore his ACL like just a little over 8 months ago. And I think part of it too was just we have to get used to this, where, some guys come back quicker. Adrian Peterson came back, super quick and was pretty productive. And you just think about, okay, the improvements in technology and science and medicine. And we used to joke about the Tom Brady stuff with Guerrero and the pliability. Well, sometimes guys find the right trainer, sometimes they find the right treatment, the right rehab, the right methods, whatever. Sometimes your body just heals a little quicker than other people do. Everybody reacts differently. So it might just be one of those things where it could be the rehab, it could be Diggs just naturally being able to come back quicker than some other guys do. It could be a combination. But all I know is, when they signed him, I said, okay, I'm expecting him to be there week 5. And if he's there anytime earlier than week 5, then I'm really going to temper my expectations. But after watching the video this week, and we got mandatory minicamp coming up on Monday, and then you've got camp late July. I mean, if he's out there fully cleared for camp, I mean, I think it's not unreasonable to start expecting him to be out there week 1.
I'm still in the camp of he's going to start the year on PUP, but that position is weakening by the day. I just think I honestly, I think it's what makes him a great athlete. Yeah, maybe he just has some sort of rare genetic thing, rare body type where he's just his body's able to recover quicker. I mean, these guys are crazy athletes, anyways. Especially Stephon Diggs with all he's accomplished. But I mean, maybe it's avocado toast. I don't know. Maybe it's avocado ice cream. Maybe he's got the pliability going on with the other stuff on that boat. I don't know. But I'm certainly happy that it seems like Elliott Wolf and the Patriots really did their due diligence here and brought in a guy who's going to help Drake May. Uh, Now, getting to Drake May, um, I obviously it was his best day so far. What was it? 11 of 14 or 14 of 19, whatever it was, with two really good throws. I heard Tom Curran say he had an absolutely insane throw to Booty down the field on a corner route, as well as a wheel route to Ramondre. And I won't bore you with the homer take of how good Drake May is going to be, or what my prediction is. I'm going to ask you a question here, Nick, and it's actually about Josh McDaniels. In his interviews before practice, Josh said they were repping plays they hadn't before. Now, do you think over the last weekend, Josh took a step back and reevaluated his plans for this offense, or do you think we're just 3 weeks into camp, Drake is just starting to feel a little bit more comfortable, or do you think it's a little combination of both?
I think it could be a combination of both. I think it's just natural for somebody to get more comfortable, more time they're working with something. I mean, just think about college, any level of, academics that you were involved with. You first kind of get that syllabus and you sit down and you start going through the beginning pages of the textbook or whatever you're using. And at first it's like, wait a minute, I've got to kind of recalibrate. And what are we talking about here? I kind of equate it to like calculus. I'm not great at advanced math. I'm pretty good at basic math, but advanced math I'm awful at. And it's like if you walk in and it's calculus 1, then you got to get to 2, then you get to 3. And so it's just kind of the natural progression of a professional athlete, especially when you talk about football players. It's going to take time. So we first have to understand it's going to take time. We all need to be patient. Uh, Everybody kind of looks at this in a vacuum, and they think about Drake May with Josh McDaniels for the first year, and it's McDaniels' offense, and all of that is true. But let's not forget, he had 2 different offensive coordinators his last 2 years at UNC. He had a different offensive coordinator last year, his first year with the Patriots. He has a different offensive coordinator this year with the Patriots. The fact is he's had 4 different offensive coordinators in 4 seasons. So there's a lot going on, I'm sure, in the head of Drake May. So first we've got to be patient with that, understand that he's going to take some time to learn this offense, get comfortable with this offense. And we go back to last year, and he took a little while to learn the Van Pelt offense, which is West Coast, and he didn't really look comfortable until towards the tail end of training camp when everybody started wondering, is this guy going to leapfrog Jacoby? So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, as you're going through this part of the year, as you're going through OTAs and mandatory minicamp, the whole point is to, all right, let's see what works, let's see what doesn't work, and let's lean in on the things that work. And so as there's more time together developed between McDaniels in May, McDaniels is going to have a better grasp as to what May does best and what he's most comfortable with. So just, theoretically, big picture, not even looking at the individuals, if it wasn't May, if it wasn't McDaniels, if you're just looking at any OC and any quarterback in football, it would stand to reason that in the middle of May, he's not going to be as good. He, the quarterback, is not going to be as good as he should be in the middle of August. So I think there's a little bit of maturation within the offense from McDaniels. I also think as time goes on, they're sprinkling in things that they believe he could be more comfortable with. And you hope to find that perfect storm combination. So by the beginning of September, he's ready to roll.
Yeah, I think the overarching point with May obviously is he really hasn't had stability in the last 4 years. Last year he wasn't even really. I mean, yeah, Alex Van Pelt, he's a good quarterback coach. I'm still not bought in that Alex Van Pelt is a good OC. So I mean, he was kind of working with a deficient offensive coordinator last year, I'll say, and now he's moved to. I mean, most agree, unless you're Joe Murray, a top offensive coordinator in the league. I think McDaniels' time uh, viewing Ohio State in those spring practices last year. I know he took a bunch of other visits elsewhere, but I keep going back to Ohio State because it's a productive college offense. He wants to figure out what Drake does well, and I think incorporating some of the things that college offenses are doing, as a lot of teams in the NFL are, is really going to benefit him. But Drake himself, I mean, that you can see off the field when he's in his interviews the maturity. I can only imagine the maturity he has inside the room when attempting to understand the playbook, and with all the resources available to him, having the ability to go back and watch Tom, having the ability to pick McDaniels' brain, on whatever play, because McDaniels obviously is an encyclopedia of his own offense. I just think, for me personally, anyone who's saying that the combination of Drake May and Josh McDaniels will not ultimately be beneficial for Drake May hasn't really been paying attention. Um, any final thoughts on Drake May from this practice before we kind of move along here?
Look, I just think, the intangibles are there. And if he starts to strip away some of the turnover-worthy plays that we saw last year, and a lot can be on him, a lot can be on the things that were around him. The offensive line should be better. I don't know if the offensive line is as good as some people are trying to make it sound like it is. I think there are still questions up front, but they should be better than last year, which isn't saying much, but they should be better than they were a year ago. I think he's got better skill position players around him. But there's one thing I don't doubt, and that's that he has one of the best offensive coordinators in football with him. And I think, the experience of McDaniels, everybody kind of wraps their head around the years with Brady, and I understand it. I totally get it. But, when the hire was made, and McDaniels was my number one guy that people were talking about, possible OCs, I was McDaniels all the way at the top of the list. And it's, you look at what he did in 21 with Mac, you look at what he did with 2020 with Cam, he has proven. You look at what he did with Jimmy G when Tom was out for the suspension. Like, he has proven that if he has a system and people that understand the system and some decent talent, that he can get the most out of that talent, or get a lot out of that talent. And even in Vegas, I worked in Sacramento, and I watched a lot of those Raiders games where McDaniels was coaching, and he's not a good head coach. Breaking news. And I think, but the questions that I had about him as head coach was timeout usage, situational football, those kinds of things that you see a lot of coordinators struggle with when they become head coaches. So I just think, and he also, can he control a room of 53 guys is a question. But Devontae Adams had some of his best seasons with McDaniels as the OC. Josh Jacobs had a couple of, at least one really good year with him. So I think he's got the talent, as an OC. And I think he knows what he's doing. And if you wanted a guy that could work with May and bring stability, which I think is huge, because Josh isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And I think that's good news. He can hang here with Drake. We just talked about 4 OCs in 4 years. he can hang with Drake May here for the next, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 years as his offensive coordinator. And that's when you start to build upon what you have from the foundation, which is what we saw with Brady, where, it was slow in the beginning, but it was a slow progression, and then boom, and you just added to the encyclopedia of knowledge. So I think he'll be fine. I'm not telling you 100% that Drake May is going to be a franchise quarterback. I feel like he is going to be that guy, but I do need to see him take care of the football better, and I need to see that development throughout this year to fully sit there and say I guarantee you he's going to be that guy. But I love the pick when it was made, and I think he's going to get better throughout the season, and I think the Drake May we see in December of 25 will be exciting enough to get us really, really pumped for what 2026 is going to look like.
I couldn't agree with you more, especially on the turnovers. I think Josh is going to kind of beat that out of him. I mean, for crying out loud, he made Aiden O'Connell look like a valuable quarterback for a half a season when Derek Carr went down. So I think people should just trust that Josh knows what he's doing, and that's what made Josh and Brady so dangerous. Not that I'm comparing Drake May to Tom Brady. I'm just using this as an example. Um, the length of time that they were together, they were of the same mind. They could read each other's mind. Josh knew what Brady was looking at. Brady knew what Josh wanted to look at. And I think given that time, Josh and Drake and Josh, great show, by the way, um, can build that rapport, can start thinking that way and seeing it the same. And I think that's when they start to get really dangerous. I want to, you kind of talked about it earlier with the O-line. I too have some concerns with the O-line still, specifically at that left guard spot. I know Greg isn't allowed to talk about it much, but he did kind of allude to, Wes Schweitzer. God, that's a
Yeah,
tough name for me to say.
yeah,
Um, being kind of like a quote unquote top option. Um, I, I'm not very confident in that. I think they might start getting Jared Wilson in that spot once he really starts participating in practice. How do you feel about that left guard spot? It just feels like they didn't do anything to address it all that much in the draft or in free agency because they were kind of hoping that the guys that they already had on the roster would kind of fight for that spot, but it's not really seeming like, 3 practices in that it's happening.
yeah. I did a podcast a few weeks back now, probably several weeks back, who knows? And it was, I believe it was for the Everything Pats pod, and I talked about Joe Tooney, and hindsight's 2020. In the moment, I wasn't the biggest fan of the idea of Joe Tooney because of the cost, but at the time, in real time, I also expected them to spend some money at left tackle. And so the idea was, well, if you're going to dump a bunch of money into the O-line, you already have Owenu making the money he's making at right guard, so dump that money into left tackle. Well, as we know, again, hindsight's 2020, but they did not spend the money at left tackle. Stanley stayed with Baltimore, and then, a couple of the other guys, Dan Moore ended up just getting a huge contract, which I thought was borderline nuts. Jalen Moore decided to go to Kansas City, so they got shut out of the left tackle market. And so when you look back at it and you look at what Joe Tooney just signed for with Chicago, and you look at what it cost them, which I believe was a 2026 or 2027 fourth-round pick.
It was a 26 fourth rounder, if I'm
Yeah.
remembering correctly.
So, to me, it's like, man, if you have one of those, do we regret it? Hindsight kind of moves. At the end of the day, I would have loved Joe Tooney on this team and making the money that he's going to make with Chicago. I'd be fine with it because you'd be able to anchor him in between the rookie left tackle who has some questions and Garrett Bradbury, who was god-awful last year in pass protection. So to have Tooney in the middle of those two guys would make a lot of sense. But that's hindsight. It's Monday morning quarterbacking. So now you got what you got. And what they have is a bunch of numbers that, they've got. I think they can find somebody who can play at least average. I don't know if you're going to find anybody out of this group that's above average. Cole Strange, I do think he has shown flashes from time to time. He's been up and down, but he has had stretches. I mean, right before his injury, you could argue that he was playing some of his best football. Maybe he can give them something, some average play. Schweitzer to me is more of that versatile old school vet who you can throw in at left, right guard, or center. I'm not in love with him starting. And, City So is interesting because all I've read about City So far was that he was getting some reps at right tackle early on. before the media was watching. So I thought, hey, City So had a decent 2023. Can he find that again? But he's been on and off the field, and he was banged up all last year. So they've got numbers, and uh, if they can find one of those guys out of Layden Robinson, who sounds like he's pretty much out of the pecking order at this point, Layden Robinson, Schweitzer, Strange, if you can find one guy out of those 4 or 5 dudes that can just give you some average football, then I think you can survive. But if the left guard is giving you average football, you better be getting, average to above average football from your left tackle, and you better be getting at least average pass protection from Bradbury. And I also agree with you. I would not write off Jared Wilson just yet. And Bedard has talked about this a little bit. When he gets back and he's healthy, Bedard has said that he does believe that Wilson will get at least a shot at left guard to see what he can do. So I would not write off the idea of Wilson playing a role in that. But again, that means Garrett Bradbury, unless you feel like Ben Brown can do the job. Bradbury's got to be good enough to put Wilson at left guard if Wilson could play left guard. So, and of course, Wilson was a guard before he was a center, so you have to imagine he has some capability of doing so. But Bradbury's got to hold his spot down to allow that to happen. So there's some questions. Morgan Moses at right tackle had his worst season in a while last year for the Jets. If you look at Pro Football Focus, he's 34 years old. So I think they've upgraded the offensive line, but there are still questions there lingering for me.
I agree with you. You really took honestly all the points I was going to make there. So
I
I think
apologize.
no, it's all good. And it means we're of the same mind. It also just to add to that, Mike Onwenu showing up, a little bit chunkier than he was last season. I think Greg had mentioned that. I mean, that's really it. That all I have from OTAs. Yeah, Eftim Chisholm, very much involved. We'll get to him in the last segment here. I really don't have any other thoughts from OTAs before we kind of wrap that up and go to the wide receiver situation. Any final thoughts on the OTAs there?
I mean, I think we're pretty much covered. I mean, I think defensively, from what we've heard, the third practice in front of the media was a little different, but it sounds like the defensive line had been eating up to that point. I'm excited to see Milton Williams and Barmore and Keon White and Harold Landry on the same defensive line. I think that could bring some excitement to the defensive side. And I'm excited to see Robert Spillane too, who I still think has been overlooked by a lot of people. I think people underestimate the Robert Spillane signing. I think that guy can be really good, and I think he has been really good. And he's going to be the quarterback of the defense. So don't overlook him. And one more note I would say defensively is everything I've read, everything I've heard is that Craig Woodson has had a really good OTA. Now, does that mean
The
he's going to
camp
be
stuff.
great? Yeah. I mean, does that mean he's going to be great? No, of course not. He could fall on his face. It's still really early. But so far, so good. People have been impressed by Woodson. So, maybe that 4th-round pick at the top there that some people were questioning, maybe, just maybe, the Patriots did know what they were doing there. Hopefully so.
I think by Mike Vrabel's reaction to drafting him, I think they kind of know they have an inside track of who he could be. Um, Also, just one last thought. Spillane, I think he leads the team in tackles this year. We're going to go ahead and move on here. I know you got a time crunch, so not going to waste it. Put out a poll, not a poll, but put out my prediction on X last night. For anyone who missed it, I gave my way too early predictions on the wide receiver room. I had on the team Stephon Diggs, Mac Hollins, Pop Douglas, Kyle Williams, Kayshawn Boutte, and Efton Chisholm. Jalen Polk also made the roster. Now, most notably there, Kendrick Bourne, Javon Baker, and John Giles all were cut. I've gotten a lot of feedback on that on the old X machine there, and people saying, uh, Polk doesn't deserve to be on the roster. Kendrick Bourne is more deserving. This kind of ties into a question that I got from viewer of mine, Michael Rodnick. And essentially, it boils down to, and I'm going to ask you this question before we kind of dig in. Do we think that the second round draft pick plays a part with this coaching staff and this team in keeping Jalen Polk as a viable option, or do you think Kendrick Bourne, with his rapport with McDaniels, will kind of override the draft status for Polk there?
We'll lean Bourne right now. I think Bourne could end up being, the second best receiver on this team this year if they keep him on the roster, because we haven't seen Diggs with pads on and out there playing actual football, and Diggs is not the same Diggs from 3 or 4 years ago. I think Kendrick Bourne, some people might overlook him, but you go back to 2021, had a really good season with McDaniels. Then 2022, he had the funky season because he and Patricia didn't see eye to eye, so that was just a bad marriage. And then 2023, he was actually really productive with Bill O'Brien, and he was on pace, quote unquote, to have his best season in the NFL in 2023 until he tore his ACL in October. So up until that ACL tear, he was really good for a team that couldn't do much of anything offensively. And so I think you go back to 2023 and say he was trending towards who he was in 2021 before the injury. Last year, look, he's coming back from an ACL. Not all guys return the same kind of way, as we mentioned earlier. And so I think, with a different system, different coaching staff, rookie quarterback, playing with Jacoby Brissett, it was kind of a clunky year last year as well. So I think this year could look more like 2023 or 2021. And if that's the case, I think that right now he's your second best receiver on the roster. Proven receiver in the NFL. You obviously hope Kyle Williams proves towards the end, at least by the end of the year, that he's a worthwhile pick. But right now on this roster, you could argue Pop Douglas and Kendrick Bourne, with Diggs being the question mark, are your two best receivers. So I would look at Kendrick Bourne and say, right now for me, he's on the roster. Jalen Polk's going to get on the field first. He has been on the sidelines. He's coming back from the shoulder surgery. You can't make the club in the tub. So if he's not out there playing, if he doesn't get on the field by camp and start making some headway, I could see Polk end up on the PUP. And then they hope that maybe something happens, not hope something happens, but, if something does happen, then you can move on from, whoever's not making a difference. Baker, to me, has got a big-time uphill climb. But from right now, Bourne versus Polk, I go Bourne. He has the track record. Polk had a miserable year last year, as much as I liked him coming out in the draft. He's coming back from an injury, hasn't been on the field just yet. Bourne has that chemistry with Josh McDaniels. So I would lean Bourne right now out of those two guys specifically.
Yeah, I mean, it's the old adage, right? The best ability is availability.
Yep.
So, I mean, Kendrick Bourne, yeah, he wasn't there this week. From what I understand, he was on vacation with his wife. And it's mandatory. Not mandatory. It's voluntary, not mandatory. So, obviously allowed to do that. But yeah, I mean, I do agree with you. I may end up, changing this prediction right after this show. Probably not going to see if I can stick on it. But you make some salient points about Kendrick Bourne, especially 2021. The guy looked excellent, 800 yards. I think, obviously, we all know I'm a Kyle Williams fan. I think he's their starting X day one. He's got a lot of speed, a crisp route runner, can really get off the line quick. Give me your Efton Chisholm take. Do you think Efton Chisholm truly has a shot, not an outside one, but a true shot to make this team day one?
My Efton Chisholm take is that he's got to beat out Pop Douglas. And I think that's going to be tough. Now, I think it's possible because Pop Douglas, as explosive in short spaces as Pop is, and as he's made plays, I just said he's one of the two best receivers on the roster right now from what you've seen with the Diggs questions going on. Obviously, if Diggs is 100% ready to go, he's your best receiver on the roster. But, the Pop question is, McDaniels loves his guys to block, as we know, and Chisholm is a couple of inches taller and a little bit thicker than Pop. So does Pop fit in perfectly? I know some people think that Pop could end up being the best receiver on this team this year because of the McDaniels offense. I know Phil Perry's been pretty big on Pop Douglas in the offseason. So I think the toughest challenge is for Chisholm to prove that he can do as much, if not more, than Pop Douglas. And it also depends on Jalen Polk's health. Again, if Jalen Polk can't get out there, then that makes it much easier for Chisholm to get on the roster. Because I don't think Chisholm's an outside guy. I know he played some snaps on the outside at OTAs. It's OTAs. There's no pads on and all that stuff. I think he's pretty much a slot. He's pretty much a slot version of Danny Amendola. I wouldn't say he's Julian Edelman. Julian Edelman was faster, straight line speed. In short areas, he's similar to those guys. So I think in this McDaniels offense, he's more slot than anything. And so, you know, maybe he finds his way on the roster at the very end, and they say we can carry both he and Pop for at least a couple of weeks. But I think it's going to be tough for him. We'll see how his game transitions to pads and when the competitive football really starts to kick in. He did run a 4.71, and that does matter to a point. And I know there are guys that have run slow. Puka Nacua was a 4.59 or whatever he was, and somebody threw Anquan Bolden at me who ran a 4.7. Anquan Bolden was 6'1", 220, and a possession receiver. So we got to see how it works. To me, if you're keeping Chisholm on this roster, he's playing slot. So does that mean that you keep two slot receivers and you say we're going to keep both he and Pop and say goodbye to Polk and Booty, for example? They could certainly do that. But for me, that's the biggest question: is how do they feel? Are they comfortable with playing? Keeping two guys on this roster that are pretty much restricted to one position? Or do you think you can slide Chisholm to the practice squad, which, might end up being tough if he has as good of a preseason as some are getting him ready to have? So I think that's the ultimate question, man. If you think Pop is the guy, then it's tougher to keep Chisholm on this roster. If you think Chisholm can overcome him or they're okay with keeping two slots, then I think Chisholm has a great shot at making it. I do think he has a shot, though.
Yeah, he's just is going to be the final thought here because I know you're up against it. Um, Efton Chisholm definitely is the F-type receiver. If he can not have the bonehead plays that Pop Douglas is prone to having, I think that kind of pushes in his favor. Um, that's really all I have here. We're gonna go ahead and wrap this pod up here. Nick, I cannot thank you enough for dropping by. You're always welcome. Everyone, please go follow Nick at Nick C Radio on X. Nick, final thought here as we go into the weekend before minicamp.
Hopefully they're not terrible this year.
Yeah. I think we're all hoping that. All right, buddy. Well, listen, folks, I hope you have a wonderful evening. Again, Nick, thank you for stopping by and have a great night.